The Mask. It was October the 31st, 2024, a night when the boundaries between the living and the dead were said to blur. In the small, forgotten town of Havenbrook, Halloween wasn't just a celebration, it was a warning. Every year the townspeople would don their costumes and masks, but not for fun or tradition. They did it out of fear. Legend had it that on this night, a spirit known only as the Faceless walked the streets. No one knew what it looked like. They only knew that it wore the face of its last victim, creeping silently from shadow to shadow, searching for the next. Maya, a newcomer to the town, hadn't believed the stories. She had only just moved to Havenbrook a few months ago, and the old-timers loved telling her spooky tales. "It's just small-town folklore," she laughed, brushing it off. She had bigger concerns, like getting her house unpacked and settling in, but something about October 31st made her uneasy. Third. As evening fell, Maya decided to give out candy as she had always done in her old neighborhood. She put on a simple witch's hat and waited for the first trick-or-treaters. Hours passed, but no one came. The street was eerily quiet. She glanced at the clock. 8:15 p.m. The last light of the setting sun faded, casting a deep, unsettling darkness outside. Suddenly there was a soft knock at the door. Maya's heart jumped. She opened the door slowly, peering outside. A single child stood on the porch wearing a worn-out mask that looked handmade. It was simple, too simple. The face painted on the mask was strangely realistic, almost as if it had been stretched onto the mask. The eyes were too lifelike. They followed her. "Trick or treat," the child whispered, barely audible. The air seemed to thicken. Maya, feeling a strange discomfort she couldn't explain, handed the child some candy, but instead of leaving, the child just stood there, staring through the mask. The eyes seemed to grow darker, like voids consuming the faint light from her porch. Do you need something else?" Maya stammered. The child tilted its head and the mask shifted unnaturally, like skin. Something about the child's presence felt wrong, too solid and heavy for such a small body. Maya's hand trembled as she shut the door. The knocking continued, soft, persistent, unrelenting. Maya's nerves were fraying. She turned off all the lights in the house, hoping the child would leave. But as she looked out her window, she saw that the street was now filled with people in masks, all staring up at her house. Their masks looked familiar. No, they were familiar. They were the faces of people she had seen before. The mailman, the woman from the grocery store, the old man who lived down the street. Her breath caught in her throat. Then she realized it. The faces weren't just masks. They were the faces of the missing, the ones she had heard about when she first moved to Havenbrook, the ones people said disappeared every Halloween. Her stomach twisted in fear. One of the masked figures stepped forward, standing beneath a flickering streetlight. Maya recognized the face immediately. It was hers. She stumbled back from the window, her mind racing. The whispers she had heard about the Faceless weren't folklore. It wasn't just a ghost. It was something much worse. It took people, claimed their faces, wore their identities, and turned them into empty shells. The knock came again, louder now, almost urgent. Maya's hands shook as she bolted the door, but when she turned, her blood ran cold. The child was already inside. Its mask was gone, revealing a smooth, featureless expanse where a face should be. It raised a hand slowly, and she watched in horror as the skin of its fingers began to stretch and mold like clay, shaping into her own face. "You won't need this anymore," it whispered in her own voice. The lights flickered and everything went dark. The next day, the townspeople went about their business as usual. No one asked about the new resident who had vanished overnight. They never did. Another house stood silent and empty, its windows dark, just like so many others. But if you walked past that house late at night, you might see a figure standing at the window, wearing a mask that looked exactly like Maya. And you might feel its eyes follow you home. But whatever you do, don't open the door.